households and small firms. He received a BS and a PhD in economics from Tulane University. Prior to joining Kellogg, he was a postdoctoral fellow at the Haas School of Business at the University of California, Berkeley. Economists agree that an important component to alleviating global poverty could be financial inclusion. However, an important question is which financial tools and services could have the biggest impact. In a recent paper published at the Journal of Finance, Shan and his co-authors examined the impact of the Mexican government's decision to distribute debit cards to poor families so that they could receive their cash transfer payment from the government. In particular, they look at how households that receive debit cards change their saving behavior compared with when they received the same cash transfer but had to go to a bank to access their money. In this very interesting project, I think, is because they have other works along this line, but in particular in this paper, they found that cardholders did appear to save more because of the debit card. Today, well, we are very happy to have him, and he will be presenting about why are firms slow to adopt profitable opportunities. The seminar is an hour, and as usual, you can interrupt to ask questions and to provide good comments to Sean. Okay, so thank you again, and well, Sean, what is yours?
Thank you so much, Julio, for the introduction, and thanks to the organizers for having me. Julio very kindly described what was my first paper in Mexico, and today I'll present my most recent paper in Mexico, which was an RCT conducted there. So this project is called "Why Are Firms Slow to Adopt Profitable Opportunities?" and it's joint work with Paul Gertler and Ulrika Malmendier at UC Berkeley and Waldo Ojeda at Baruch College, CUNY. So the motivation for the paper is that firms are slow to adopt profitable opportunities. And this is true across many domains, including manufacturing, retail, banking, and healthcare. And it's also true across various types of opportunities. Those can include cost-saving technologies, management practices, and even optimal pricing. And firms are actually foregoing substantial profits by being slow to adopt these profitable opportunities. So a few examples of that: small and medium enterprises in Brune, Carlin, and Shore forego a 28% increase in productivity by not adopting profitable opportunities. Medium and larger firms in Bloom et al. Forego a 17% increase in productivity by not adopting. And then larger retail chains in Delavigne and Genskow forego about $16 million in annual profits, which is about 2% of their revenues. So the question that we're asking in this paper is why? Why are firms slow to adopt profitable opportunities? Now, the existing literature has found that several things may be contributing. Those include a lack of information, fixed costs combined with credit constraints, misaligned incentives within the firm. But even when these standard economic frictions that have been studied are removed, firms are still often slow to adopt profitable opportunities. So there's some other constraint at play as well. And there's a couple quotes from some of these papers to that effect. So in the Bloom et al. Paper, they say that even if the owners became convinced of the need to adopt a practice, they would often still take several months to do so. So they're still slow to adopt that practice, even once the main constraint in that context, which was information constraints, was removed. There's also a couple of papers highlighting things like managerial inertia or stickiness in organizational structures and practices as constraints to adopting these opportunities. But these last two still leave you wondering, okay, what's causing the managerial inertia, or what's causing the stickiness in organizational structures and practices? And so that's what we're going to try to address in this project. Our research question is, why do firms exhibit inertia in organizational practices, even though these behaviors reduce their profits? And even in the absence of these standard economic frictions like informational frictions, fixed costs, or misaligned incentives. And the method that we're going to use to address that research question is a randomized controlled trial to analyze 3 potential explanations, which include present bias, limited memory, and a lack of trust in other firms. And then we also look at potentially distorted beliefs about present bias and limited memory. So what we do is we offer a lower merchant fee to firms who are already using a fintech payments technology. So these are firms who have already adopted a technology that allows them to accept card payments. They've adopted that technology from our fintech payments provider, that's our partner in this research study. And we're just offering them a lower merchant fee, which is just a cost savings for them. For the median firm, the expected reduction in their fee is equal to about 3% of their profits. Now you may wonder or be thinking, is 3% big or small? So one way that we like to think about it is think about 3% of your own income and whether you would take an action that takes about a minute to do in order to generate an increase in income equal to that 3% of income. What we do is we randomize a number of things in the study. We randomize the value of the offer, meaning how much we reduce the merchant fee. We randomize whether we give you a deadline, whether we give you a reminder, and whether we say in advance that we'll send a reminder, which I'm going to call an anticipated reminder. And this RCT design, our RCT design was motivated by an augmented version of a model by Keith Erickson, where in his model, he's trying to address how present bias and limited memory can interact to affect task completion. And then we're going to augment that model to include trust, and you'll see why. So the main findings, to preview them, are that reminders increase take-up of the lower merchant fee by about 18%. So this is evidence that firms are forgetful. Deadlines do not increase take-up. So that's evidence that present bias does not explain non-adoption in this setting. Telling firms that they will receive a reminder does not reduce initial take-up when we initially tell you that we'll send you a reminder. So that's evidence of overconfidence about memory in the Erickson model, which I'll talk about in more detail later. And then interestingly, anticipated reminders increase final take-up after we send you the reminder more than unanticipated reminders. So you get the same reminder in these two groups, but if we told you in advance in that initial email that we were going to send you the reminder versus sending you a similar initial email, but not telling you we were going to send you a reminder, telling you in advance we are going to send you that reminder increases take up after we send the reminder. And so we then conduct a survey to try to get at mechanisms behind what about the anticipated reminder is leading to that increase in take up, because it's something that in the initial Erickson model is not, you can't generate. Yes, Julio.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. So one thing is, so for the trust, basically you are not manipulating trust. So basically you do a survey and it's the perceived trust in the survey. This
yes,
is how it
exactly.
is? Oh, okay.
Yeah, and the reason for that is that we did not realize that trust was going to be at play when we designed the experiment. So we designed it with the standard Erickson model, just thinking about present bias, limited memory, and then potentially distorted beliefs about those. Then we found this unexpected effect, which is the last bullet point here, that the anticipated reminders increased final take-up more than unanticipated reminders. You can't generate that in the standard Erickson model. And so then we conducted this survey to get at mechanisms, and we find two pieces of evidence in the survey that I'll go over that point to that anticipated reminder increasing trust.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And so just to briefly summarize here, those two pieces of evidence, the first is that firms report that the anticipated reminder changed their perception of the offer's value. So if you got the anticipated reminder rather than the unanticipated reminder, you're much more likely to say that the reminder changed your perception of the offer's value. And then we have evidence that this is happening through trust. In particular, we ask a bunch of general survey questions like whether you generally trust advertised offers, and a bunch of other things like memory, procrastination, et cetera. And across all those measures, the one that stands out as having a heterogeneous treatment effect is trust, and in particular, the effect of trust on, or the effect of the anticipated reminder relative to the unanticipated reminder on take-up of the offer is concentrated among people who generally distrust advertised offers.
There is a question by Brit. I don't know, Brit, if you would like to ask directly or.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So my name is Brit Spiru. I'm a trust researcher, and I work for the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. The organization is based in Nairobi, working across 11 countries. And we work with small to medium businesses, currently more than 6,000 across youth, females, and others. And I'm very interested in this use of trust that you've discovered in here. And my question goes to this: does your anticipated reminders give evidence of trustworthiness? You say you will do something, and then quite quickly you follow up and you do it. And this, in a lot of other research, tends to indicate trustworthiness because you said it and you did it, and it was seen to happen in a short space of time. Is that another indicator of trust, or is it just working off the trust in your other survey work?
Yeah, that's exactly the channel through which we think the anticipated reminder could be increasing trust. So from the survey, what we know is, what the evidence points us to is just that the anticipated reminder did increase trust somehow and also increase the firm's perceptions of the offer's value. But I think it's exactly what you said, which is that because this company, so trust is an issue in a lot of firm-to-firm interactions in many contexts, and you may often have a lack of trust in other firms. Maybe they're trying to take advantage of you somehow or do a transaction that benefits them more than you. And so the fact that this firm said they were going to do something and then followed through on doing that. So they said they'll send the reminder, they followed through on sending the reminder, I think is doing exactly what you said, which is, yeah, that it's that particular channel through which the anticipated reminder is leading to an increase in trust.
So in my language, that would be trustworthiness behavior. So the fintech provider here in this instance is giving evidence of trustworthiness, which enables people to trust more easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it would be super interesting to and maybe we can chat about it further after, to design some follow-on experiments to try to, as Julio was saying earlier, we didn't design an experiment that directly tried to manipulate trust initially because we didn't know that's what was gonna matter. But yeah, I think follow-on work in that vein would be super interesting to do.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. All right, so let me summarize the model that we're using to think about all of these different potential constraints that prevent adoption of profitable opportunities. So we use an augmented version of the Erickson model to fix ideas about present bias, limited memory, and lack of trust. The model is going to allow for biased beliefs. So that takes the form of naivete about present bias and overconfidence about memory. The present bias piece is going to be standard. We're going to have beta delta preferences, where you also have some beliefs about your present bias, beta hat, that can be greater than beta, in which case you're naive about your present bias. And then we also assume limited memory. So this is also in the Erickson model, where you have a probability of remembering something at time t, conditional on remembering it in t-1, and that's going to be denoted rho t. You're also going to have beliefs about your memory, rho hat, and those can also be biased. So you're going to be overconfident about your memory if rho hat is greater than your actual, if rho hat is greater than your actual memory rho. And then we're going to add a probability the firm assigns to the offer being true, or going back to Brit's question, that the firm making the offer is trustworthy, and that's going to be alpha t. So the agent's going to decide to act based on their current value function, which is just going to be, if they do act, they get the benefit y. It comes next period, so it's getting discounted by beta and delta. And then it's also, there's some expectation over whether they actually get that benefit or don't get any benefit if the offer is not true. And so that's the alpha t here. And then they pay some cost CT to act. If they don't act, well, there's still future periods. And so with some probability, they think they're going to remember in the future. And then if they do remember, depending on what the cost to them of acting in the future periods looks like, they may or may not act. And so there's this continuation value of not acting today, but potentially acting in the future. You're going to get a cost draw C drawn each period from a known distribution in the model. There's going to be a deadline in period T. And so then by backwards induction from the deadline, you're going to adopt today if your cost draw today is below some threshold C star. And that threshold C star is going to be defined recursively by a set of equations where it's going to be based on the reason that it's a recursive set of equations is you have this continuation value here in the formula for C star, which is also going to be a function of C star as well. And then we can also calculate the probability for any firm of adopting at period T. And we haven't yet estimated a structural model of this to see how important each parameter is, but that's on the to-do list. And when we estimate the structural model, these probabilities of adopting at each period are going to be the moments in the model, and they're just going to be a function of your probability of remembering at time T and the probability you didn't already adopt in some period before T. So the predictions of the model that we're going to be able to test with our experiment are first that a higher benefit or a higher value of the offer, higher Y, is going to increase take up of the offer. Second, reminders are going to increase take up of the reminder if firms are forgetful, meaning they have a row less than 1. Deadlines are going to increase take up of the offer if firms are present biased, meaning they have a beta less than 1. And that increase in take up caused by the deadline is going to not necessarily occur entirely at the deadline. This was the whole point of Erickson's model, but instead it can occur partly today rather than at the time of the deadline if firms are partially aware of their limited memory. So the intuition there is that if you want to procrastinate because you're present biased, or even if you're not present biased, but you're just waiting for a later cost draw, you may want to wait. But then if you're worried about forgetting, that's going to push you to not want to wait and to want to take up today instead, as long as you are aware of your limited memory and not too overconfident about it. The fourth model prediction is that anticipated reminders has to do with anticipated reminders and pre-reminder take up. So anticipated reminders will increase take up at time today compared to the unanticipated reminder if firms are forgetful and have accurate beliefs about their memory, so they know they're forgetful. But anticipated reminders will have no effect on take up today if firms are fully overconfident about their memory. So the intuition there is that if you are worried about forgetting, so you have accurate beliefs about your memory, then once you know you're going to get a reminder, you no longer have to worry about forgetting. So then you're back to potentially wanting to wait for a better cost draw or wait because you're present biased. Whereas if you're fully overconfident about your memory, you're not worried about forgetting either way. And so the anticipated reminder is not going to affect your decision about whether to take up today or not, or to wait, because you're not worried about whether you're getting a reminder. You think you're going to remember anyway. And then finally, on anticipated reminders and post-reminder take up, we have two predictions. The first is that anticipated reminders will not affect take up compared to unanticipated reminders if firms inherently trust the offer, but they'll increase post-reminder take up compared to the unanticipated reminder if some firms distrust the offer and if the anticipated reminder increases trust. Okay, so if there are no questions about the model, let me go into the experimental setting. So our research partner was a fintech payments company offering a point of sale hardware and app. Firms in our sample were, again, already users of this technology. So don't think about this as adopting the point of sale terminal technology, which may be profitable for some firms and not profitable for others. These firms were already all users of this technology, and we're just going to be offering them a lower fee per transaction that they're charged. Our research partner, this fintech company, the reason they wanted to offer the lower merchant fee was to measure elasticity. So when we first started talking to them, they basically told us we have no idea whether we're charging the optimal fee. And in fact, one of their competitors was undercutting their fee. And so they wanted to do an experiment around lowering the merchant fee to measure how elastic use of this type of payment technology was with respect to the fee. So what is the merchant fee? Well, it's a % of the sale that the firm pays to accept electronic payments through cards. Prior to our experiment, firms paid a 3.5% or 3.75% merchant fee, and then 2.75% or 3% fee. And which of those two we offer is randomly determined. And that offer is for the next 6 months. After 6 months, it reverts back to the initial fee. And the reason for that was that our fintech partner was terrified that they were going to lose a lot of money on the experiment if the firms were completely inelastic with respect to the fee. And then the logistics were that we sent out messages via email and SMS. And then in the email, there's a button to click that takes them to an online form to accept the lower fee. I'll mention also that this is a very common form of interaction between financial institutions and firms or individuals. So our experimental sample was made up of about 34,000 firms who are already actively using the fintech technology. We restricted the sample to the top quartile of the fintech company's users. So this 34,000 is the top quartile of users based on sales. And the reason we did that was to ensure that the offer would be sufficiently valuable. We didn't want to be making the offer to some firms who use the technology barely at all, because for those firms, it wouldn't be such a valuable offer.
Sean?
Yes.
I have a question. So basically this is the firm received the offer and they start receiving the benefit of the offer as soon as they accept it. And
yes.
Okay, and one thing is there something, so it was, they have to complete something, or it was just click and that's it, and accept?
Yeah, so they have to complete a short form. It's essentially logging into their account. I'll show you what the email looks like that we sent them, okay. and then that short form, we our partner, the fintech company, forecast that it takes about a minute to complete. And so we told people in the email, which I'll show you in a second, that it takes about 1 minute to complete because we wanted them to have a sense of the time cost involved.
Okay, thank you.
So then our main outcome is going to be from administrative data, just on whether they accept the offer or not. And then we're also going to conduct a survey of a small subsample of firms to explore mechanisms. We were restricted to a very small subsample of firms relative to the administrative data sample we have of 34,000. We could only survey about 400 firms, and that was due to constraints with our research partner. Essentially, instead of them sending us a bunch of contact information and us hiring a survey firm, we had to have employees within our research partner conducting the surveys with just one person we hired overseeing them. And they were already full-time employees of this company working in the call center. And so that greatly restricted the sample size that we could survey.
Sean?
Yeah.
And there is a question by Justin too. Yeah, Laura.
So I was just going to ask, so the discount lasts 6 months from when they sign up, or 6 months from when the original message is sent?
It's 6 months from the original message. And that's also clear in the email that I'll show in a few slides. So we tell them what date it ends, basically.
Yeah, so that's even more, like every day they delay is actually, it's not like a discount on Amazon or something. Every day they delay is costing them money.
Yes, yeah, that is true. Although you might think that 1 day is not so much money, but.
Sorry, and I think I missed it. How long is how long do they have to sign up?
So if they're in the deadline group, they have 8 days. If they're not in the deadline group, they don't have a limit.
Got it. Thanks.
And Justin?
Yeah, sorry, quick question. Who in the firm did you send the emails to?
So we sent the emails to whoever had initially adopted the technology and supplied their email to the firm,
Is this
to the
typically like the
fintech firm.
is typically like the firm owner or is it like an accountant, or do you know?
Yeah, so we think it's typically the firm owner. These are relatively small firms, 2 to 5 person firms. I'll show you that in a couple slides as well. The smart thing to do to answer your question would have been to ask in our survey what when we surveyed them if the person who received the email was the owner, but we didn't think to do that, so I don't have a more concrete answer to say it was the owner for X% of them. But we think that in general with these small businesses, it would have been the owner who had just talking with our partner and in focus groups we did with some of them, that it would have been the owner for most of these firms.
Okay, so then the benefits of the treatment are likely realized by the decision maker in your experiment, then, you think?
Yes, yeah, we think so.
Thanks.
So here's an example of one of these firms. This is a coffee shop in Mexico City. This is what the technology looks like that they use. It's a tablet with a small piece of point of sale hardware that you can tap your card to or your phone to do Apple Pay. The firms that we work with, as I was just mentioning, are small firms, just because those are the firms who use this technology. And so you can see here in this graph that less than 20% of them are just one-person firms. Most of them do have multiple people in the firm, but the vast majority are 2 to 5 person firms. The mean is 3.5 employees and the median is 3 employees. And then some other firm characteristics. You can see here that about 44% of the firms are run by women, average age is 39, and there's a pretty dispersed distribution of types of businesses that we have in the data. So we have a lot of small retailers, which you can think of as like small shops. We also have professionals, which are things like a small doctor's office. And then you can also see here that on average, they've been using this technology, the fintech payments platform, for about 2 years at the time of the experiment. So to go
Sean,
over.
Sorry,
Yes.
just like, do you know how many of the fintech technologies they use on average? Like, is that the only company that they would use, or do they have several?
My sense is that most do just use one. The way that they structure, I mean, sometimes firms switch from one to the other over time, but then they would stop using one and start using the other, because the way that the payment fees are structured, it wouldn't benefit you to have multiple ones. There's full interoperability between banks and like the issuing bank of the card and the acquiring bank that issued the point of sale terminal. So there's no reason for them to have multiple point of sale terminals.
Gotcha, thanks.
All right, so here's the experimental design. I should mention also to Julia's question, there is a fair amount of heterogeneity in what fraction, because the alternative is cash. So there's a fair amount of heterogeneity in what fraction of sales they make through cards, which is going to also affect how valuable the offer is. So the experimental design and timeline. This is showing you the timeline. We launched this in September of 2020. You can see on day 1, if you were in the no deadline, no reminder group, then you received the offer on day 1, but then you didn't have any subsequent emails or deadline to adopt. If you're in the anticipated reminder group, you received the offer with a note about the future reminder that you would receive. And then we sent you that reminder on day 7. We also told you in the initial email which day we were going to send the reminder. If you're in the unanticipated reminder group, you received the offer on day 1, but it didn't say anything about receiving a reminder, but then you did receive a reminder that's identical to the reminder in the anticipated reminder group. And then if you're in the deadline group, you received the offer with information about the deadline, and then that deadline was on day 8. And then we also had the interactions of these, which I'm not showing in the timeline, but you could have been, for example, deadline and anticipated reminder. We also had an interesting time launching this experiment because our initial launch date was planned for March 24th, 2020. That date had been set in stone for a number of months. Obviously, we could not launch in March 2020. So here I'm showing you the average monthly sales of the firms in our experiment. And so you can see that they had some level of monthly sales, and then in March and April, it dropped dramatically. So we were watching these data as we were figuring out what to do. Obviously we couldn't do the experiment once a bunch of the businesses had shut down and there were stay-at-home orders and things like that. And so then we waited until sales had reached the same level they had been prior to the pandemic. So that told us that these businesses were back to operating at their normal scale. We redefined the sample at that point. So if there were some businesses that had shut down and were no longer using the technology, then we removed them from the sample. So here's what the emails look like. On the left, you can see the no reminder or unanticipated reminder emails, since those are the same, with no deadline. And so here we're telling them, well, first we tell them in big letters at the top that they get this lower fee. We're telling them the details. Like I said, it's this, it lasts for 6 months or until March 31st, 2021. And then they have this button to click to activate the lower fee. And we tell them, we wanted them to know the time cost of doing it. So we told them this offer will only take 1 minute to complete. Then on the right, we have the anticipated reminder and deadline group. So you can see here, the deadline is in bold and red, fill the form by October 6th. And then we also tell them in this group, the anticipated reminder group, that we're going to send them a reminder on October 5th if they still haven't updated, if they still haven't activated the promotion. Okay, so let me move. Yes, question.
2 questions. So one question is, so you know whether the person opened the email or not?
Yes, we do know that.
Okay, and the other thing is, why you didn't mention the actual fee?
Yeah, so we didn't mention their current fee because we debated this a lot with our partner organization. And the issue with mentioning the current fee, so the reason to mention the current fee would obviously be to make sure they know what the current fee is so that they can see how valuable this offer is. The reason that we didn't do it was we didn't want to overwhelm them with information. So we thought putting in, a second number. So we have the 2.75 here, putting in another number to tell them their current fee would just be maybe a bombardment of information. We do have a survey question that asks them about whether they know their current fee, and so that's reassuring for us. So what we see here in the survey, here we're taking their perceived fee minus their actual fee. And so here you can see, well, first of all, there's a big mass at 0. So a lot of people know their exact fee. And then people are actually more likely to overestimate their current fee. This mass, for example, may come from people who have a 3.5 or 3.75% fee, just rounding it to 4. But that tells us, if anything, they would have thought that this is a more valuable offer than it was.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so to jump into the results, the first result is that so before getting to any of the behavioral stuff that I talked about before, incentives work. The higher value offer increases take up. So we have random variation in the value of the offer. Either we offered you a 2.75% fee or a 3% fee. And if we offered you a 2.75% fee, we see about 3 percentage points higher take up of that more valuable offer. Second, reminders increase take up. So here I'm showing you on the left the overall levels of take up in the no reminder and reminder group. And then on the right, the point estimates of that treatment effect. And so what you can see on the, is that when we send the reminder, which is day 7, you see about a 5 percentage point increase in take-up compared to a baseline take-up of about 26% in the no reminder group. The reminder effect also persists over time. So it's not just that, so after the deadline, people in the no deadline group could continue adopting. And it's not that regardless of whether you got the reminder, people end up adopting later on. Here you can see that even 6 months out, you still see that effect of about 5 percentage points in take up as a result of the reminder. The second main result is that deadlines do not increase take up. So first, we do see actually on day one, a slight decrease in take up, relative to the no deadline group. I see a question in the chat. Surprised by the low levels of take up of something in their interest. Yeah, so you can, the overall level of take up, for example, here for the no reminder group is about 26%. We think there's a number of reasons that take up is still far below 100%, even with everything that we do. One is that some firms are still not going to trust the offer. So we find that trust is important, but it's not the case that the anticipated reminder is going to shift everyone into trusting this offer. Some firms are going to be very busy when they get both the initial reminder and both the initial email and the reminder, and then maybe they forget. Some firms don't see the messages. So going back, Julio asked us about whether we observe whether firms open the email. We do observe that. So I'll show you in a second those reminder results conditional on opening the email. You'll see that take up is higher conditional on opening it. So maybe the ones who didn't open it didn't see the message. And then some firms, even though I showed you this histogram, that most of the firms know their current fee pretty well. Some firms may not, or maybe they don't know their current sales, and so they can't predict the value of the offer very well. And then finally, the cost savings from the lower fee are 3% of profits for the median firm, but they're still relatively small for some firms. And a lot of that's being driven by this variation I mentioned before in response to Julia's question, that some firms are still making most of their transactions in cash. So as a percent of profits, the benefits for those firms are going to be lower. And so they have less of an incentive to adopt. So these are all reasons that take up is still going to be below 100%, even though we're just offering them a cost savings. But I don't think that takes away from the fact that we find that these different interventions do have an effect. And so that's evidence that those are constraints to adopting this profitable opportunity.
Sean, I have a quick question.
Mhm.
You sent reminders to people who did and didn't open the first email, right?
Yes.
Okay. So like for a lot of people, for the people who didn't open the first reminder but didn't open the first email but got reminders, I mean, it just acts as another email that they get to inform them of the deal, right? I mean, it's not the same thing as a reminder, right?
Yeah, exactly. So let me show you so you might be worried that all of this effect of the reminder could be coming, from just people who didn't see the first email, but now they saw the second email and so they opened it. So let me show you the effects conditional on opening the first email. So that'll just be for the group that did definitely see it because they opened the first email. And here you can see that you still see that 5 percentage point, a 5 percentage point effect. Obviously take up rates are higher here because this is because the people who opened the email are the ones who took it up. But you can still see very clearly this effect of the deadline or of the reminder on take up for those who opened the first email prior to receiving the reminder. And so for them, it couldn't be that it's coming from just that they didn't see the first email and now they saw the second one.
Sean, just out of curiosity, like what percentage of the sample actually does open the first email?
It's about 55%, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
And that's
really high, no? For like that setting and that type of firms, it's actually pretty well connected to us.
Yeah, it is high. So we've gotten our partner to send us data on open rates of other campaigns that they've run. Depending on the campaign, some other campaigns do have about a 30% open rate, but that's about their max across other types of campaigns they've run, which again goes to the point that this is a a profitable thing. So, they can see in the subject line that it's a profitable thing potentially. And that drives open rates higher than the average email that you might receive from this fintech payments provider. And then the other big difference, so in their other campaigns, their click rates are abysmally low, like 2%. And then here, obviously, they're much higher because they have to click to take up the offer. Okay, so on the deadlines, we see that the deadline decreased day 1 take up. So that you can see here, but it had no difference by day 8. So take up caught up in the deadline group by day 8. You can see there's a positive point estimate here of the effect of the deadline by day 8, but the no deadline group who can continue adopting after the deadline actually quickly catches up in terms of take up after the deadline. And so it's not like there's something going on here that we just don't have enough power to see, because then really you might, if there were an effect of the deadline, you would care about whether the no deadline group caught up in terms of take up, and they do catch up within the next few days. And that's what you can see here. So there is, at the time of the deadline, higher take up in the deadline group, but then within the next few days, the take up in the no deadline group catches up, and then even continues and surpasses take up in the deadline group, where they cannot take up anymore after the deadline has happened. So then our third main result is that anticipated reminders increase take up. First, we look at take up on day 1, because the Erickson model predicted that if firms are not overconfident, if firms have accurate beliefs about their memory, then an anticipated reminder will actually lead to a reduction in take up on day 1, because for some firms it's optimal to wait. And if they're forgetful, which we've already seen evidence of, then they'll be worried about forgetting, as long as they have accurate beliefs about their memory. And so then for those firms, getting the anticipated reminder will lead them to say, oh, I can wait because I know I'm going to get the reminder. We don't see that. So we don't see a statistically significant difference in take up on day 1, which is evidence in the Erickson model about overconfidence about memory. Because when you're overconfident about your memory, you don't care whether you're going to be sent a reminder or not, because you think you're going to remember anyway. Then we see in days 7 and 8 that the anticipated reminders after the reminder is sent increase take up by about 2 percentage points more than the unanticipated reminder. That effect also persists over time after the deadline, where the people in no deadline groups can continue adopting. And so now I'm going to spend most of the rest of the time thinking about what are the mechanisms behind that anticipated reminder effect that we just saw. So the first survey question that pointed us in the potential direction of trust was a survey question that said, did the reminder change your perception of the offer's value? And for that question, you can see here in the graph on the right that there was a much higher rate of people who received the anticipated reminder who reported that the reminder changed their perception of the offer's value. Now that doesn't necessarily point to trust yet, but we think that this, in combination with the result I'll show you next, are evidence that this anticipated reminder was increasing trust in the offer, and that's why it was increasing their perception of the offer's value. So the next piece of evidence, we have a number of survey questions to test complier effects. So these are things like trust, I trust advertised offers, reciprocity, about being inclined to do business with people who live up to their promises, and other things like procrastination, memory, overconfidence, and attention. And so what we did was ask each of these questions on a 1 to 5 scale, and then we're going to code a dummy as high. So for example, high trust, if they report agreeing or completely agreeing with the statement, I trust advertised offers, and we're going to code them as low otherwise.
Can I just ask a quick question there?
Mm-hmm.
Trust is made up of 2 components. One is altruism, the offering in the first place, and the second is the reciprocity that comes back to you. And the evidence on global surveys and things looking at the trust game and comparing it to the dictator game show that the majority of what people do inside trust is actually altruism. And it is that act of altruism which invokes the reciprocity coming back. So you've equated all of these elements down to a high trust or low trust, but I'm wondering if there is anything that looks just at the reciprocity element as opposed to coding it all as trust.
So we do have a separate question just on reciprocity, which is the second question here, which is I'm more inclined to do business with people who live up to their promises. And so we don't have a separate question for the altruism component, which I think to really get at this decomposition of types of trust you're talking about, we would have, it would have been good to have that. But we do have, I think the evidence that I'll present then is consistent with what you just said, Britt, about evidence being that it's mostly coming through altruism, because I'll show you that the effect is happening on this trust, high trust indicator, but it's not happening on this high reciprocity indicator.
Interesting. I'll wait for the research. Thanks.
Thank you. So here's that first result. What we're doing here, what I'm showing you here is taking the sample, and here I'm comparing the anticipated reminder to the unanticipated reminder. So the darker bars in this graph are going to be the anticipated reminder, and the light bars are going to be the unanticipated reminder. And then I'm splitting the sample into low and high for each of those survey measures I just told you about. So here, for example, low trust or high trust. And so then here you can see the treatment effect of the anticipated reminder and whether there's a heterogeneous treatment effect for low trust and high trust. And so here you can see, for example, for low trust, that the anticipated reminder does have a strong treatment effect in terms of take up of the offer. For individuals who have high general trust, who generally trust advertised offers, there's not a statistically significant treatment effect of the anticipated reminder. And then what we want to do is compare whether those two treatment effects are, whether the difference between them is statistically significant. It's a little complex the way we did this figure, since we're showing you average take-up rates, but then those confidence intervals that we're showing you are based on the treatment effect. And so you can imagine if you just took this treatment effect here and compared it, that's positive and very statistically significant, and compared it to this negative and statistically not significant treatment effect for high trust individuals, those two confidence intervals would not overlap. And that's why you see here, when we compare the effect of anticipated reminders separately for those two groups, the difference in the treatment effect is statistically significant at the 1% level. And furthermore, for the other general survey measures that we look at, there is no statistically significant difference in the treatment effect of the anticipated reminder, with the exception of a marginally significant difference for overconfidence.
Sean,
and so here,
question.
yes, please.
Sorry. No, I was just curious. I mean, not that this would affect this interpretation, but is there a big difference in low and high trust on their likelihood of opening the emails to begin with?
I don't think we've looked at that. That's a good question.
Okay, because I mean, I guess to me, it would suggest that, I mean, the question is about if they trust advertising offers. And so I would imagine that trust would play a big role, or at least that measure of trust would play a big role in whether they even saw the email.
Yeah, that's a great point. We haven't looked at that, but we definitely should redo this with opening the email as the outcome.
Just to make sure that I understand, because I find this a bit like crazy, this result, right? Because I mean, this would basically suggest that trust levels are so low that just by the fact that you follow up on your promise that you will send a reminder, that changes something about what I think about this company. I guess is that right? Like that the trust, like, well, you made a promise that you will send a reminder. You did send a reminder. I actually now think you're a better company than I thought before, and that's why I follow through.
Yeah, so that's what we think is going on. What we can definitely say from this result is that the effect of the anticipated reminder is concentrated among the firms who generally distrust advertised offers. And then we're making a bit of a jump to exactly what you said, which is that we think it's that the anticipated reminders are because they told you they were going to do something and follow through, are increasing their trust in the offer.
If I could just jump in there on just, I guess, explaining why that might be the case. Generally, you see in the dialogue, people talk about trust. They talk about distrust and trust maybe being on a continuum. In actual fact, they're two very different things. What you were probably talking about is mistrust and trust are probably on a single continuum. Distrust is a very negative emotion. If you think about someone betraying your trust, it invokes a very high negative emotion, and it's probably something different to something sitting on the trust scale. So your low and high is probably better description of mistrust and trust in terms of what people are looking at and what they're seeing there. And what we know about trust is that trust isn't built, trust is earned. And so this means that by engaging in trustworthy behavior, you have earned that trust for people that were less likely to do it. Because what trust is an unknown thing. It's not a risk, which you know what the actual outcome is. Trust is that leap of faith into something that is unknown. So if you have low trust or a mistrust, it's an absence of information. And in this case, you are therefore fulfilling that absence of information by this trustworthy behavior that therefore encourages the next step, if that makes sense.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, makes a lot of sense to me, and I think we can definitely use some of that language in our description.
Can I ask, like, have you? I guess you could do 1 million heterogeneity tests and it gets overwhelming, but I keep thinking about like how much they use the service and how long they've worked with this. I mean, it seems with the pandemic, maybe a fair number of these are new users, maybe not. But if I'm thinking about trust, I think like that how long you've used the service and how much you use it are important factors in your relationship.
Yeah, that's a great point. We have not done that heterogeneity test, but we certainly could, because we have in the admin data how long they've been a user of the technology.
And what the research generally says is that trust is this kind of ephemeral system one process. It's not a logical, rational thinking process. And so it is generally to do with unconscious factors that are driving what's going on rather than rational decision making. So it would be interesting when you looked at those statistics, in fact, whether that is borne out, whether it is really a system one process that's going on here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Great. Well, thanks everyone for all the comments. Definitely more we can do on this trust aspect. Let me now show you the effect of the unanticipated reminder. Here you see somewhat reassuringly, or kind of in something we think validates a bit these tests, that the only category where you see a statistically significant, at least at the 10% level, difference in the treatment effect of the reminder in general, meaning the unanticipated reminder relative to no reminder, is for those who report having lower memory. So you can see among those who report having low memory, the take-up rates by those who do not receive a reminder are much lower. Receiving a reminder has a huge effect for them, whereas for those who report high memory, there's no treatment effect of the reminder for them. And then finally, for the deadline, we don't see any statistically significant differences in treatment effects across the low and high groups for these variables, but we also didn't see any overall effect of the deadline. So in my last 6 minutes, there's one other result that I wanted to talk about, which is the elasticity of the usage of this technology. So this goes kind of now away from the overall research question we were asking about why firms are slow to adopt profitable opportunities, but goes to the question of why our research partner was doing this project with us in the first place. And of course, whether offering the lower merchant fee benefited our fintech partner depends on the elasticity of use of the technology with respect to the fee. We estimate that. So the treatment on the treated estimate is that taking up the offer increased sales by about 40%. And so we can use that to calculate the sales elasticity. The average reduction in the fee was about 20%. And so we can use that to calculate an elasticity of about -2. So when we reduced the offer, when we reduced the fee, the increase in sales was 2 times as large as the proportional reduction in the fee. And so that means that it was profitable for our fintech partner to lower the merchant fee. So I can show you in a bit more detail those results as well. Here, just first starting with the intent to treat effects. This is just on average for everyone who we offered the lower fee to, because we also had a pure control group who we didn't offer the lower fee to calculate these elasticities. You can see about an increase of about 10% in sales just as a result of being treated, regardless of whether you took up the offer. And we also see an increase in the number of payments, number of transactions by about 3%, and about a 1 percentage point increase in the probability of making at least one sale in the technology. And then if we use those to calculate a treatment on the treated, we can do that by instrumenting whether we can estimate that by regressing on whether you adopt it or not, and instrumenting that with the treatment. And so there we find this 40% increase, which is what we use to calculate the elasticity. And then there we see about a 4 percentage point increase in the probability of using the technology.
Sean,
yes.
Did you calculate whether this is actually beneficial to the firms itself? Like, so does it come?
Yeah, so that's a very difficult thing to calculate, because so like by revealed preference, you would think it did. They're increasing their sales. That's also increasing their costs. But cash also has a cost, and it's hard to quantify what the cost of cash is. So we think by revealed preference, the fact that these firms were taking it up, and they could have took it up and not increased their sales, and then they're just getting a direct cost savings. But instead they took it up, they chose to increase their sales. So then maybe on net, just in looking at the cash outlays of it, they may lose money, but we don't think that's the right measure of whether it was beneficial to them, because they could have taken it up and just kept the same sales that they had before. And one really interesting result that we're hoping becomes a second paper based on some other admin data around that is that we asked this question to them: what impact has this offer had on your business? Some of these responses do get directly to your question, like 48% of them reported, this was just an open-ended question, but 48% of them reported something around greater profits or saving money on the commission. But interestingly also, about 25% said that they used to pass the fee through to their customers, and now that they have a lower fee, they started absorbing the fee themselves rather than passing it through to their customers. And so that could be, imagine that the cost of using cash is like 3%. And so now when we've lowered your fee from 3.75% to 2.75%, all of a sudden it may benefit you to encourage customers to use this technology by no longer passing through the merchant fee to your customers in the form of higher prices. And so we're looking at data right now to more carefully measure at the firm level whether they were previously passing through the fee and are no longer passing through the fee, because we think the IO of that could be super interesting as well.
Mm-hmm. I just find it a bit difficult to think through this, because I mean, yes, I know that it's like very difficult to actually estimate this. But I mean, in this context, typically firms do not fully understand their profits and their sales, right? So for like, I think there's a bit of a threat that they would say like, oh yeah, I increased my profits, but I would guess that from the demand side, that there are not that many clients that actually do have a card, right? So, I mean, it seems kind of weird to me that now they would have higher sales in the sense that they do sell to more clients that they didn't sell before because they didn't, accept cards because of the higher fee. So like, it's not clear to me where the higher sales are coming from.
I think there's two things.
Profits.
Yeah, well, the higher sales, we don't think is an increase in overall sales. We think it's that they previously were taking those payments in cash, and now that they have a lower fee, they're taking the payments in card. And so anecdotally, one way they do that is they just like put the terminal in a drawer, and they only if the customer comes and says that they want to pay by card, maybe they say, oh, we don't take card payments. And so the idea is like they only want you to pay by card if the fee is high enough, they only want you to pay by card if they're going to lose your sale otherwise. But now that the fee is lower, maybe now it's lower than the cost of cash for them, because there are a lot of costs of cash in terms of paying people to stick around and count the money, in terms of like worrying about money getting skimmed off. If you're a big enough firm, having to hire an armored truck to bring the money to the bank. And so there's some cost of cash. And if we've lowered the fee now below that cost of cash for some of the firms, then now they might want more of their customers to use cards. And so now they can stop doing all these behaviors they were doing before to basically steer customers towards using cash. So we think they have some ability to steer just based on them saying like, oh, the machine is down today, or hiding the machine in a drawer or something like that, which are based on the focus groups. These are some of the techniques that these firms use to like they want to accept cards so that they don't lose customers who are going to leave if they don't accept card payments, but they don't want the average customer to pay by card if the cost of paying by card is high enough.
And can you say something about like the further cost of cards for the firm itself? Like in the sense that how like how banked are those firms, and like how do they typically like pay for their inputs and all those things? Because like in some settings, right, then you receive a card payment and then you have the additional cost of like having to go to a bank to then like withdraw that money again, etc. Plus the tax problem.
Yeah, in these data we can't, but I have another ongoing project that's exactly what we're trying to do. So maybe we can chat about that when we meet later today.
Nice. Thanks.
Great. So to conclude, we find that forgetfulness, overconfidence about memory, and a lack of trust can prevent firms from adopting a profitable opportunity. And we think that the implications of this are that the analysis of slow firm adoption of profitable opportunities or non-adoption of profitable opportunities would benefit from considering mechanisms beyond the standard economic frictions that have been looked at in the literature. We know that there are well-known behavioral determinants of individuals failing to act, and we found evidence that those can also affect firms. We've also found evidence that lack of trust is a key friction. And more broadly, we think that this lack of trust may be very prevalent in many firm-to-firm interactions. So it could be important for a lot of firm interactions in developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. I don't know if there are other questions or comments. I have one. So and again, is thinking on your result on trust, and also thinking on the optimal policy for the fintech company. How about directly sending a message saying, look, we have reduced our fee to 2.75%. If you don't want the fee to be reduced, you have to complete this form.
Default, yes.
Yeah, default the other direction. Yeah, so they would probably trust that more, I agree. One thing, you mentioned whether this is beneficial for our partner. When we were talking with them, so actually the reason that this whole project was born and that there is an email for them to activate the lower fee. So our partner was interested in learning the elasticity. You could imagine another experiment where you just automatically lower everyone's fee and you tell them, and then you see what the elasticity is. The reason this project was born was because for technical reasons, they couldn't do that, because actually on the back end, they had to like have someone manually changing everyone's fee once they accepted it. And so you'd be surprised how much some, fintech, they can sometimes miss the tech, be not so developed in the tech component, but so they had to have someone manually doing it at the time. And so that's why they had to send these emails in the first place. And then when we piloted this with like a different sample of 10,000 firms, that's when we saw these low overall take-up rates and some weird patterns that led us to basically develop this entire experiment. But another interesting point on that is that the elasticity, like we're estimating the elasticity for a specific group, which are the people who activate the lower fee. The elasticity could be much lower just in general, because you could imagine some firms, you could imagine that the their elasticity with respect to the fee is correlated with whether they take up the lower fee. You could also imagine some firms would just never get the email and not know that their fee was reduced, so they would be inelastic. And so if they did it that way, then our results about this actually being profitable for the fintech partner might no longer apply. We don't think they have that kind of external validity to everyone's elasticity.
Great, thank you. So there is one question by Vita. Yes.
Thanks. So my question goes to, I guess, if you were going to take this further and look at trust going into the future, one of the interesting, very funny things about trust is that when you give a gift, that act of altruism, it invokes people a sense of obligation that they will generally reciprocate much higher and much greater than the actual value of the gift that was kind of given. So I don't know if this is seen as a gift in this instance, or if there was some other kind of form of gift or altruism that you could see to see whether or not you are actually invoking trust in the next sort of step. Just an interesting sort of thought that was playing in my mind.
Yeah, that is super interesting, because you could think that the elasticity is that some form of reciprocity for this lower fee gift that they received. I think our one piece of evidence that I alluded to earlier, that this is not just being driven by reciprocity, is in this graph here. So this is showing that if you compare those who are low on the reciprocity scale, saying that they're more inclined to do business with people who live up to their promises, there's no difference in the treatment effect. So you can see that there's a very similar sized treatment effect of the anticipated reminder, regardless of whether you're high or low reciprocity, whereas it all seems to be coming from high or low trust instead. So that, I think, is one piece of evidence that it's not just all coming through this reciprocity channel.
Yeah, and I guess this is from the survey, right? So it's a much smaller sample size than your overall kind of data set. So given that reciprocity is a component of trust, I would suggest that you probably need a bigger sample size to be able to assess that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ideal thing would be if we can design an experiment that separately, if there was some intervention that only loads on the altruism piece of trust versus the reciprocity piece of trust, that might be the most convincing way to try to get at your question of separating, basically, how is the trust, is the trust increasing through one of those channels versus the other?
Great, thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Sean, again, for the great presentation, and thank you everybody for attending the seminar. Okay. Bye.
Yes, thank you all, and looking forward to the meetings.
Thanks, Sean.